When I sent that text to our family group chat saying I was going into a coma and needed someone at the hospital, my brother Marcus replied, "Too busy watching TV." 3 hours later, I made sure he'd never be too busy for anything ever again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with the headaches, not the regular kind you get from staring at spreadsheets too long or forgetting to eat lunch. These were different. They came without warning, like someone was driving nails through my skull from the inside out. By the third week, I couldn't ignore them anymore. The emergency room at Riverside Medical was packed that Tuesday evening. I'd driven myself there, hands trembling on the steering wheel, vision blurring at the edges. The intake nurse took one look at me and fast-tracked me through triage. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't just stress or dehydration. Dr. Martinez was young, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that couldn't quite hide the concern when she looked at my scan results. She pulled up a chair next to my bed, which doctors only do when they need to deliver news that's going to change your life. "Rebecca, I need to explain what we're seeing," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "You have a significant brain aneurysm. It's large, and given your symptoms, we believe it's actively bleeding." The words felt like they were coming through water. Brain aneurysm, bleeding. I tried to process what she was saying, but my head felt stuffed with cotton. "What does that mean exactly?" I managed to ask. "We need to operate immediately, tonight. This type of aneurysm can be fatal if it ruptures completely. The procedure will require putting you under general anesthesia for several hours, possibly longer depending on what we find." My throat went dry. "How dangerous is it?" Dr. Martinez didn't sugarcoat it. "There are risks. With any brain surgery, there's a possibility of complications, stroke, permanent neurological damage, or worse. But Rebecca, if we don't operate, the alternative is almost certainly fatal." I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the little holes in each square. Funny how your brain focuses on stupid details when it's trying to avoid processing something too big to handle. "How long do I have to decide?" "We need to prep you for surgery within the next 2 hours. I know this is overwhelming, but time isn't on our side here." That's when it hit me that I might not wake up, that this sterile room with its beeping machines and antiseptic smell could be the last place I'd ever see. I thought about my apartment, how I'd left dirty dishes in the sink and laundry piled on my bed. I thought about my job at the marketing firm, how I'd been working late all month on the Henderson campaign. None of it seemed to matter anymore. "Can I call my family?" I asked. "Of course, we'll give you some privacy." After she left, I sat there staring at my phone. The family group chat was called The Hendersons, even though only half of us still had that last name. It included my parents, Robert and Linda, my older brother Marcus, my younger sister Chloe, and me. Marcus had created it 3 years ago, claiming it would help us stay connected. Mostly it was used for my mom sharing blurry photos of her garden and my dad forwarding political memes that made everyone uncomfortable. I started typing several different messages, deleting each one. How do you tell your family you might die tonight? How do you ask them to drop everything and come sit in a hospital waiting room for hours, not knowing if you'll make it through? Finally, I kept it simple and direct. "Emergency surgery tonight at Riverside Medical. Brain aneurysm. Going into surgery in 2 hours. Might not wake up. Really need someone here with me. Room 314. I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. The little notification showed it was delivered immediately. Then I waited. The first response came from my mom, just 2 minutes later. "Oh, honey, I'm in Portland visiting Aunt Margaret. I can't drive back tonight. The roads are terrible. Sending prayers." Portland was 4 hours away. The roads were perfectly fine. I'd checked the weather before coming to the hospital. My dad responded next. "Stuck at work. Big presentation tomorrow morning. You'll be fine. You're strong. Keep us posted." It was 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. What presentation happens at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday that's more important than your daughter's brain surgery? Chloe's message appeared third. "Oh my God, that's so scary. I'm in Seattle for Jake's cousin's wedding. Can't leave. I'm maid of honor tomorrow. But I'm thinking of you. You got this." Seattle was a 3-hour flight. The wedding wasn't until the next evening. She could have made it back and still been there for whatever cousin's wedding was apparently more important than her sister's life. And then came Marcus's response, the one that would change everything. "Can't come. Too busy watching TV. This new season is really good. You'll be fine. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from the pain medication they'd given me. Too busy watching TV? Not at work, not traveling, not dealing with his own emergency. Watching television. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I'd spent 31 years believing these people were my family, that when it really mattered, they'd show up, that blood meant something. A nurse peeked in. "Rebecca, we need to start prepping you for surgery soon. Did you reach your emergency contact?" I looked at her, this stranger who'd shown more concern for me in the last hour than my family had in the last 5 years. "Yes," I said, "I reached them." She must have heard something in my voice because her expression softened. Sometimes families handle medical emergencies differently. Fear makes people react in unexpected ways. I nodded, but she was wrong. This wasn't fear. This was who they'd always been. I'd just been too willing to make excuses for them to see it clearly. After she left, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My best friend Aria had moved to Denver 2 years ago for work, but she'd always told me to call if I needed anything.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Real friends show up," she'd said once. "Family is supposed to, but friends choose to." She answered on the second ring. "Becca, what's wrong? You never call this late." I told her everything. The aneurysm, the surgery, the family group chat that had just shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. By the time I finished, she was already looking up flights. "I can't get there tonight, but there's a 6 a.m. flight that gets in at 8. I'll come straight to the hospital." "Aria, you don't have to." "Stop. You're having brain surgery alone because your family is apparently made up of sociopaths. I'm coming. End of discussion." For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. Someone cared enough to drop everything and be there. Not blood family, chosen family. As the surgical team came to prep me, wheeling me toward the operating room, I made myself a promise. If I survived this, things were going to change. I was done making excuses for people who saw me as an inconvenience. I was done being the one who always accommodated everyone else's schedules and priorities. The anesthesia mask went over my face, and Dr. Martinez's voice was the last thing I heard. "See you on the other side, Rebecca." If there was going to be another side, I was going to make sure it looked very different from this one. I woke up 18 hours later with my head wrapped in bandages and Aria asleep in the chair beside my bed. The surgery had taken longer than expected. Dr. Martinez explained that the aneurysm was more complex than the initial scans had shown, but they'd managed to repair it successfully. I was going to live. Aria had been there the entire time. She'd taken a week off work, rented a car at the airport, and hadn't left my side except to grab coffee and call my job to explain what happened. When I asked her why she'd done all that, she just shrugged and said, "That's what people do for people they care about." My phone had been buzzing intermittently on the bedside table. Aria had been declining calls and letting texts pile up, figuring I'd deal with them when I was ready. When I finally looked, there were dozens of messages in the family group chat. My mom had written, "How did the surgery go? Hope everything's okay." This was sent 12 hours after the operation was scheduled to begin. My dad's contribution was, "Let us know when you're discharged. Glad you're all right." No follow-up questions, no offer to help. Chloe had sent 3 messages. The first was a selfie from the wedding reception with the caption, "Wish you were here." The second was, "Hope surgery went well. Couldn't text earlier. Reception was crazy." The third, sent that morning, was, "You're probably fine by now, right? These things usually turn out to be nothing major." But Marcus had outdone himself. His only message, sent 6 hours after my surgery was supposed to end, was, "Did you survive? LOL. Told you it would be fine. Drama queen." Drama queen. I'd almost died on an operating table, and he was calling me a drama queen? Aria saw me reading and reached over to take the phone. "Maybe don't torture yourself with that right now." "No," I said, holding on to it. "I need to see this. All of it." What I saw was exactly what I'd expected, but somehow still managed to surprise me. Not one person in my immediate family had called the hospital to check on me. Not one had asked for updates during the surgery. My mom had apparently spent the evening posting photos from her Portland trip. My dad had been active on LinkedIn, sharing articles about quarterly sales projections. Chloe had uploaded a full album from the wedding to Instagram, complete with captions about how magical the evening had been. And Marcus had been live tweeting about his TV show. For 6 straight hours during my surgery, he'd been commenting about plot twists and character development. Too busy watching TV hadn't been an exaggeration. It had been literal. I started scrolling back through months of family group chat history, seeing patterns I'd been too close to notice before. Every time I'd shared good news about a promotion or a successful project, the responses were lukewarm at best. When I'd mentioned dating someone new, crickets. But when Marcus got a minor raise at his job, everyone had congratulated him like he'd won the lottery. When Chloe bought a new car, my parents had driven 2 hours to see it and take photos. The messages showed a clear hierarchy, and I wasn't anywhere near the top. But what really opened my eyes was finding a separate group chat that I wasn't part of. Aria had grabbed my phone to show me something, and when she opened my messages, a notification popped up that revealed another conversation. Someone had accidentally added me to Henderson's siblings for exactly 30 seconds before removing me, long enough for me to see the last few messages. Marcus had written, "Rebecca's always so dramatic about everything. Remember when she cried about missing Christmas because of work?" Chloe had responded, "Right, and now this surgery thing. Probably just wanted attention." My dad had added, "Your mother and I think she exaggerates her problems to make us feel guilty." The conversation had been going on for months, maybe years. They had a whole separate family dynamic that existed specifically to exclude me. Not only was I the least important Henderson child, I was actively disliked by the rest of them. Aria watched me read, her jaw getting tighter with each message. "Rebecca, this is insane. These people are supposed to love you." "I know," I said quietly. "I've been telling myself they do for 31 years. The next few days in the hospital gave me plenty of time to think. Aria had to go back to Denver eventually, but she'd arranged for other friends to visit in shifts. My coworker Jessica brought me books and real food. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, stopped by with flowers from her garden. Even my mailman, Tom, had heard through the neighborhood grapevine and sent a card. People who barely knew me had shown more care than my own blood relatives. My family, meanwhile, had gone radio silent after I'd stopped responding to their messages. No calls to check on my recovery, no visits, nothing. It was like they'd decided that since I wasn't playing along with their version of events, I simply didn't exist. The silence gave me space to remember things I'd been pushing down for years, like how Marcus had gotten a full ride to college while I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for community college, and my parents had said it was because he was naturally academic and I was more of a worker bee. How every family vacation had been planned around his schedule, never mine. How when I'd graduated nursing school with honors, the celebration dinner had been canceled because Marcus had a date he didn't want to reschedule. I remembered Christmas mornings where his pile of presents dwarfed everyone else's. Birthday parties where my achievements were mentioned as afterthoughts, while his were the main event. I remembered being 12 years old and overhearing my mom tell a neighbor that Marcus was her miracle baby, and I was her surprise baby, like I was something that had happened to them rather than someone they'd chosen to love. But the worst memory was from 5 years ago, when I'd been promoted to head nurse in the cardiac unit. I'd been so proud, so excited to share the news. I'd called my parents first, expecting congratulations, maybe dinner to celebrate. Instead, my mom had cut me off mid-sentence to tell me about Marcus's new apartment, how he'd finally found a place with granite countertops and a view of the park. She'd talked for 20 minutes about his kitchen fixtures while I sat in my car outside the hospital, still wearing my scrubs, still holding the promotion letter I'd been too excited not to share immediately. I'd convinced myself that she was just distracted, that she'd call back later to properly celebrate with me. She never did, and when I brought it up weeks later, she acted like I was being oversensitive about a simple conversation. The pattern was so clear now. How had I missed it for so long? How had I spent 3 decades making excuses for people who saw me as a supporting character in their story? Dr. Martinez stopped by on day 4 of my recovery. "You're healing remarkably well," she said, checking my incision site. The surgery was successful, but you'll need to take things slowly for the next few weeks. No driving for at least 10 days, no heavy lifting, someone should check on you regularly. I nodded, already knowing that someone wasn't going to be my family. What would have happened if I'd waited longer to come in? Her expression grew serious. Based on the imaging, you probably had hours, maybe a day at most, before complete rupture. You saved your own life by getting here when you did. Hours. I'd been hours away from death, and my brother had been too busy with his television programs to spare even a text message checking if I was okay. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not angry rants or emotional letters I'd never send. I started documenting everything. Every dismissive response, every time they'd prioritized Marcus and Chloe over me, every family gathering I'd been excluded from or made to feel unwelcome at. I wrote about the Christmas when they'd forgotten to buy me a stocking, claiming they'd run out of room on the mantle, even though there were only 4 of us. I wrote about my college graduation, where my parents had left early to attend Marcus's girlfriend's birthday party. I wrote about family photos, where I was consistently positioned at the edge, like I might be cropped out later if needed. Page after page of small cruelties and casual dismissals that had trained me to expect less, ask for less, and settle for whatever scraps of attention they were willing to throw my way. But this time felt different. This time, there was going to be a record. Because somewhere between the anesthesia wearing off and seeing those group chat messages, something had shifted in me permanently. I wasn't going to be the family member who absorbed their dysfunction and called it love anymore. The discharge paperwork came on Friday morning. I'd arranged for a medical transport service to take me home, paid for it myself, even though the cost stung. Jessica from work had stocked my fridge and picked up my prescriptions. Mrs. Chen had agreed to check on me twice a day. As the transport van pulled up to my building, my phone rang. Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hey," he said, like nothing had happened. "Mom said you had some kind of procedure. You good?" Some kind of procedure? Like I'd gotten a tooth cleaned instead of life-saving brain surgery? "I'm alive," I said flatly. Cool. Listen, are you still coming to Dad's birthday thing next weekend? Mom's making that lasagna you like. The casual tone, like the last week hadn't happened, like I hadn't texted them about potentially dying and been completely ignored, was so perfectly Marcus that I almost laughed. "I don't think so." "Come on, don't be weird about this. You know how Mom gets when people don't show up." Weird about this? I was being weird about nearly dying alone while my family prioritized television and social events. "Marcus," I said carefully, "do you remember what you texted me when I said I was having emergency surgery?" There was a pause. "Not really. Why?" "You said you were too busy watching TV." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh yeah, I was in the middle of this really intense episode. I figured if it was actually serious, you would have called instead of texting." If it was actually serious? Brain surgery wasn't serious enough for my own brother to pause his entertainment? "I needed you there," I said quietly. "Look, you're fine now, right? So what's the big deal? You always get dramatic about stuff like this." That word again. Dramatic. Like having feelings about being abandoned during a medical emergency was some kind of character flaw on my part. I hung up without saying goodbye. The turning point came exactly 1 week after I got home from the hospital. I was sitting at my kitchen table, still moving slowly but feeling stronger each day, when I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and started making phone calls. The first call was to St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, where my mom claimed to be visiting Aunt Margaret. It took 3 transfers, but eventually I reached someone who could help me. "I'm trying to reach a patient, Margaret Walsh," I said. "My mother said she was visiting her this week." "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name currently admitted," the woman replied. I tried 2 other hospitals in Portland. Same result. Aunt Margaret wasn't in any hospital. She wasn't even sick. A quick call to my cousin David confirmed it. Aunt Margaret was fine, at home, and hadn't seen my mother in months. My mom had lied. She'd made up an entire emergency to avoid being at my surgery. The second call was to Marcus's workplace. I knew he worked at a tech startup downtown, something about app development that he never explained clearly. The receptionist was friendly enough. "Hi, I'm calling to check on my brother, Marcus Henderson. He mentioned he had a big presentation this week and I wanted to send flowers to wish him luck." "Oh, Marcus? He's actually been working remotely all week. No presentation scheduled that I'm aware of. Would you like me to transfer you to his manager?" "No, that's okay, thank you." Remote work meant he'd been home the entire time. Home, 30 minutes from the hospital, watching television while I underwent brain surgery. The third call was the most painful. I reached out to Jake, Chloe's boyfriend, through social media. We'd never talked directly before, but I'd seen enough of their relationship online to know he was a decent guy. "Hey, this is Rebecca, Chloe's sister. Quick question about the wedding you guys went to in Seattle. I'm putting together a photo album and wanted to make sure I had the right dates." His response was immediate and confused. "Wedding in Seattle? We didn't go to any wedding last weekend. We were here the whole time. Chloe was sick with food poisoning, actually, spent most of Saturday on the couch." Food poisoning? While I was having emergency surgery, Chloe had been sick at home and still chose not to come to the hospital? She'd invented an elaborate wedding story to make her absence seem unavoidable and important. 3 lies. 3 deliberate, calculated lies to avoid being present for my surgery. This wasn't fear or poor communication or different ways of handling stress. This was intentional abandonment. I sat back in my chair and felt something shift inside me, something that had been holding me back for years. The part of me that always gave them the benefit of the doubt, that made excuses for their behavior, that convinced myself they loved me even when their actions said otherwise, that part just stopped. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not emotional processing this time, but something else entirely. A detailed timeline of lies, documented with dates and evidence. Every time they'd promised to be somewhere and didn't show up. Every time they'd claimed to be busy when they were actually choosing something else over me. Every financial obligation they'd somehow shifted onto my shoulders while claiming it was just practical. The wedding Chloe had missed my college graduation for that turned out to be a casual backyard party. The work emergency that kept my dad from my nursing school ceremony, that was actually a fishing trip with his buddies. The family vacation I wasn't invited to because there wasn't room in the car, but somehow Marcus had managed to bring his gaming setup. Pattern after pattern of exclusion disguised as circumstance. Then I started making more calls, but different ones this time. I called my cousin David back and asked about family gatherings I hadn't been invited to. Turns out, there had been plenty. Birthday parties, holiday celebrations, even a family reunion last summer that I'd never heard about. David seemed genuinely shocked that I hadn't been included. "I kept asking where you were," he said. "Your mom said you were always too busy with work to come to family things." Too busy with work? I'd never been asked to any of those events. They'd been telling the extended family that I was the one choosing not to participate. I called my Aunt Patricia, my dad's sister, who I'd always been closer to than my immediate family. She confirmed what David had told me. There had been a whole network of family activities happening without me, and they'd been telling everyone I was the antisocial one who preferred to stay home. "Honey," Aunt Patricia said gently, "I've been wondering for years why you never came around anymore. Your parents always made it sound like you thought you were too good for family gatherings." Too good for family gatherings? When the reality was I'd never been invited. The most devastating call was to my grandmother's old neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who I'd stayed in touch with after Grandma Helen passed away 2 years ago. She'd always been like family to us, and I'd assumed she knew about my grandmother's final illness. "Rebecca, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to reach out. I still think about how you weren't there when Helen passed. That must have been so hard for you." My blood went cold. "What do you mean I wasn't there?" "Well, your family said you couldn't get time off work for the funeral. Helen kept asking for you those last few days in hospice. She really wanted to see you." I couldn't get time off work? I'd never been told my grandmother was in hospice. I'd never been told she was dying. The first I'd heard about her death was a text from my mom 3 days after the funeral, saying, "Grandma passed peacefully, service was lovely, she would have wanted you to know she loved you." I'd cried for hours, thinking I'd missed my chance to say goodbye because of bad timing. Now I learned that my grandmother had been asking for me, wanting to see me, and my family had simply chosen not to tell me she was dying. Mrs. Rodriguez kept talking, but I could barely hear her over the ringing in my ears. She talked about you constantly those last weeks, about how proud she was of you becoming a nurse, how you were the only one who ever called just to check on her, not because you needed something. She left you something in her will, you know, a jewelry box with her engagement ring. Your mother said she'd make sure you got it. I'd never received any jewelry box. I'd never been told about any inheritance. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded, staring at my phone. Everything I'd believed about my relationship with my family was a lie. Not just neglect or favoritism, but active deception designed to isolate me and rewrite history. They'd stolen my goodbye with my grandmother. They'd lied to extended family about why I wasn't around. They'd created an entirely false narrative where I was the problem, the antisocial one, the daughter and sister who'd chosen to distance herself. When my phone rang that evening, it was my mom. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Rebecca, honey, I've been thinking about you since your surgery. I know we couldn't make it, but you understand, right? These things happen so suddenly." Her voice was warm, concerned, exactly the tone she used when she wanted something, like we were going to slip back into the old dynamic where I accepted whatever explanation she offered and moved on. "Mom," I said calmly, "I know you weren't in Portland. I know there was no emergency with Aunt Margaret." The pause was long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then she laughed, but it sounded forced. "Of course I was in Portland. What a strange thing to say. I called the hospitals. I talked to David. Aunt Margaret is fine, and you weren't there." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, sharper. "I don't appreciate being interrogated by my own daughter. If you don't trust me, that says more about you than it does about me." That response told me everything. No explanation, no apology, just an immediate attack designed to make me feel guilty for questioning her. The same tactic she'd used my entire life. "I also know about Grandma Helen," I said quietly. This time, the silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. "What about Grandma Helen?" "I know she was asking for me. I know you didn't tell me she was dying. You were busy with work. We didn't want to burden you. She was my grandmother. And she died peacefully, surrounded by family who could actually be there." The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Family who could actually be there? As if I wouldn't have dropped everything to be with my grandmother if I'd known she was dying. "Where's the jewelry box she left me?" "What jewelry box?" "Her engagement ring. Mrs. Rodriguez said she left it to me in her will." Another long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." But I could hear it in her voice. She knew exactly what I was talking about.
Mom, I want that ring. Rebecca, I think your surgery has affected your thinking. You're being paranoid and hurtful. Maybe you should talk to someone. And there it was, the final card in her deck. When confronted with facts, she was trying to convince me I was mentally unstable, that my brain surgery had somehow made me delusional instead of helping me see clearly for the first time in years. "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," I said, "clearer than I have in a long time." "Well, I hope you feel better soon. We love you, you know that." "We love you." The words felt hollow, like coins thrown into a wishing well that had dried up years ago. "If you loved me, you would have been at my surgery." "Rebecca, that's not fair. We had obligations." "I had brain surgery. I could have died." "But you didn't die. You're fine. You're always fine." Always fine. Like being fine was some kind of superpower that meant I didn't need support or care or basic human decency from my family. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked my dad, Marcus, and Chloe, all of them, gone from my phone in less than a minute. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. What I did next surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of disappearing quietly like they probably expected, I decided to reclaim my story. The first step was getting what belonged to me. I hired a lawyer, not because I wanted to destroy my family, but because I wanted my grandmother's ring back, and I suspected it wasn't going to be returned willingly.
Sarah Chen, the attorney I found, specialized in estate disputes and family law. She listened to my story without judgment and agreed that the missing inheritance was worth pursuing. The legal letter arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from numbers I'd blocked, all coming through different family members' phones. The messages ranged from fury to guilt trips to threats to cut me off financially, which would have been meaningful if they'd ever actually supported me financially. The ring arrived by certified mail 2 weeks later, along with a handwritten note from my grandmother that had been stored with her will. She'd written it specifically for me, knowing somehow that I might need to hear these words someday. My darling Rebecca, you have always been the strongest and most independent of my grandchildren. Don't let anyone convince you that needing love and support makes you weak. You deserve both, and I hope you find people who understand your worth. Reading those words in her familiar handwriting broke something open in me that I didn't even know had been sealed shut. The second step was telling the truth. I reached out to every family member who'd been fed lies about why I never came around. I shared screenshots of the group messages they'd excluded me from. I told them about the hospital, about my grandmother's death, about years of being systematically pushed out while being blamed for the distance. The response was overwhelming. Cousins apologized for believing I'd become antisocial. My uncle admitted he'd always wondered why I'd seemed to disappear from family events. Aunt Patricia drove 6 hours to visit me personally, bringing photo albums full of family pictures that had been taken without me, evidence I never knew existed of how thoroughly I'd been erased. The third step was building something new. I started hosting my own gatherings, small dinner parties with friends who actually showed up when they said they would, game nights with coworkers who didn't make me feel like an afterthought, holiday celebrations with people who chose to be there instead of people who felt obligated but resentful. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who actually wanted my company. My family's response was predictable. They tried everything from guilt trips to threats to showing up at my apartment unannounced. When I wouldn't engage, they started spreading stories about how my surgery had changed my personality, how I'd become bitter and vindictive. But the extended family had already heard both sides of the story by then, and the lies weren't sticking anymore. Marcus lost his job 3 months later. Not because of anything I did, but because spending your work hours live tweeting about television shows eventually catches up with you. When he reached out, asking for financial help, claiming I was the only family member with stable income, I didn't respond. The same energy he'd given me during my medical emergency. Chloe's relationship with Jake ended around the same time. Apparently, watching her abandon her sister during a health crisis had shown him something about her character that he couldn't ignore. She blamed me for that too, but some consequences create themselves. My parents' social circles started asking questions about why their daughter wasn't around anymore. Small communities talk, and eventually people piece things together. The image they'd carefully curated began falling apart when neighbors realized their version of events didn't add up. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after my surgery. I was at a local coffee shop when I overheard 2 women talking about family drama in hushed voices. One of them mentioned the Henderson family and how they'd treated their daughter during her medical emergency. The other woman shook her head and said she couldn't imagine abandoning her child like that. They were talking about my family. My story had become local knowledge, and the court of public opinion had reached its verdict without any effort from me. Truth has a way of traveling on its own. A year later, I got married to David, a trauma counselor I'd met during my recovery. He'd helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just neglect, but a systematic pattern of emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. Our wedding was small, intimate, filled with people who'd proven they cared about my well-being. None of my biological family attended, not because they weren't invited, but because the invitations were returned unopened. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting them off, if I miss having a family. The answer is simple. I do have a family. I have Aria, who flew across the country for my surgery. I have Jessica, who stocked my fridge and picked up medications. I have Mrs. Chen, who checked on me twice daily during recovery. I have David, who chooses to love me every single day. I have a family made up of people who show up when it matters, who don't make me beg for basic care and respect, who don't charge me admission to their love. My biological relatives were never my family. They were just people I shared DNA with, who'd convinced me that their dysfunction was normal and their neglect was love. The brain aneurysm almost killed me, but in a strange way, it saved my life. It forced me to see who these people really were when the stakes were highest. It showed me that their excuses were lies and their priorities were clear. Most importantly, it taught me that being alone is infinitely better than being with people who make you feel alone. Marcus is still too busy watching television to maintain relationships. Chloe is still creating elaborate stories to avoid responsibility. My parents are still wondering why their version of family isn't working anymore. And me? I'm surrounding myself with people who understand that love isn't something you have to earn or pay for or prove you deserve. Love shows up. Love answers the phone. Love gets on the next flight when you need it most. I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or shared history. Family is about choice. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing people who choose me back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.